Hello, everyone, and we are live. And thank you, as ever, for joining us for today's session. I'm your host, Adlum from Payslip, and today we are tackling a topic that's getting a lot more attention in the boardrooms than it used to, certainly, and that's your global payroll cost. So, not just vendor fees, but the true end to end cost of running payroll across countries, systems, and indeed teams. We can all see invoices, we all see our headcount and how much we're paying our employees within our payroll teams. But of course, as we're going to unpack, it goes an awful lot deeper than that. And connecting all of it into a total cost per employee across all of those touch points is where things start to get a little bit more complicated, as we'll see. So, to do that and to unpack it all, I'm delighted to be joined by Mary Holland, CPP, Global Payroll Advisor. Hi, Mary. Welcome.
Hi, Ger. Welcome and excited to be here.
Yeah, we always love having you on, Mary, and sharing your wealth of experience in running global payroll with us and indeed with our audience. So, folks, Mary will be breaking down what actually sits inside a total payroll cost, where some of the inefficiencies tend to hide and where they can catch you out, and indeed how to approach benchmarking, I suppose, in a way that stands up to executive scrutiny, so that when you're presenting those figures, you can stand over them and they bear up to interrogation. From that point, having established the theory and the framework, we shall move to application. And that's where I'm delighted to introduce Nigel Bateman, our product solution consultant manager here at Payslip. Nigel, you're going to walk us through a payroll cost calculation tool that we've been working on, and indeed take us through some of the benchmarking data that we've gathered over the past 12 to 18 months. Hello, and how are you?
Exactly. Good to see you. Thanks for having me on again. Yeah, a lot of work has gone into this tool for the last nearly 2 years. So definitely exciting to share. And there's some value for everyone in the audience here, not just Payslip customers.
And to say, by the way, the tool that we're talking about, that Nigel's going to show us at the end, so do stay tuned for that, is totally free, by the way. There's no cost to this. We're not going to sting you and say there's a price you have to pay. We're giving it away totally free. It's a resource and a service that we're presenting and we're opening up to you. Um, in the meantime, just as we get going, I'd love people to who have been kind enough to join us to let us know where you're dialing in from. I'm dialing in from I was going to say sunny, but it's actually quite overcast Dublin today. Mary Holland is not joining in from Ireland, although she has joined me in Leprechaun Green, which I appreciate. Thanks, Mary.
You're welcome.
You're dialing in from California.
California IA, and we actually have a little sunshine after having a couple weeks of horrendous storms
Oh,
in
goodness.
California and kind of across the U.S. There's been some horrific snow and cold and weather, so we're waiting for spring, just
Okay.
like you are.
Well, Erin is joining in from Ontario, Canada, so Erin might have the monopoly on snow, perhaps. Sarah joining us from rainy, overcast Washington State. Pretty, hiya, Pretty. Nice to have
Yeah.
you on here with us from Atlanta, Georgia. I don't know, is it Hotlanta this at this time of year, Pretty? Probably not. People from Wisconsin, Budapest, Hungary, Copenhagen. Chile, Denver, Stephanie. Okay, nice. Cumbria. Okay, a couple from Dublin as well. Nice to see you on here with us. Germany, Alabama. My goodness, all over. That's fantastic. Hi, Kieran from Dublin as well. Brilliant. As we say, we're Cork, the real capital. None of that now, Sylvia. That's some
Dead right.
parochial
Dead right.
inter-Ireland warfare here. Uh, Nigel is also from Cork, Sylvia, as you possibly know, so he's more than on board with that sentiment. Whilst we're doing that, one thing that I suppose I want to say at the outset, Mary, and I'll jump to you to open this. It's actually no easy thing to calculate the total cost. So I'm going to launch a poll there because I'm interested to know from those who are joining us. How confident are you in your ability to well, I've said here to benchmark, I suppose, across vendors and regions. Um, yeah, not confident kind of seems to be the overwhelming one. Now that's I suppose just looking specifically at your vendors, right? Because that is one important cost aspect. So not confident kind of seems to be the overriding feeling, Mary. From your point of view, and as you go around the houses, now in your capacity as an independent advisor, how well do you think people have a handle on their costs? Not just vendors, but the total package. Is it something that people struggle to get a handle on?
I think first of all, it depends on where you are in your journey for consolidating globally in your organization. When you first start out, it's really working with the teams to kind of get those costs, get introductions to the vendors, right? When you start to ask those questions, that culture piece comes in of, what's the goal and strategic plan with that information. So I think that is hard, depending on who's running the organization or what's happening, how you're
Yeah.
connected on a governance structure. And then some organizations are moving so fast, they're acquiring companies, they're trying to onboard, they're trying to go into new territories. So it's really hard to get those costs pulled together.
Yeah.
So what team do we have to get that, right? So that's why, not being confident it's probably a very logical response, because if you're new to the role or you're moving so fast and you're trying to get a handle of that, you don't want to say I'm 100% confident to a senior leader, and you may
Yes.
be wrong, right?
Yeah. There's a natural kind of caution built in, self-protection to a certain extent, or insulating yourself against,
Correct.
mistakes, which we all do. I've asked there as well. I'll stop it now so we can all kind of see, and I'll share the results. But what I've asked is, I suppose, do you know the total cost of your global payroll operations today? And I suppose that's back against the wall. If you were asked, by an executive to produce a report, could you do it? I mean, I will say it is nice that 50% would say yes, but only partially. And actually, what I will be interested to see, and I'd love, as we're going through, if people were open enough to just share in the chat where they find those blind spots are. But yeah,
Mhm.
what's the cause of I suppose, the inability to fully calculate where exactly do the hidden costs lie? And 20% saying that it's a black box. So I suppose with that phrase "black box" in mind, Mary, you have, I suppose, outlined two aspects of the black box of payroll costs, as we've kind of termed it. Yeah, take us through a little bit. This visibility gap. I was intrigued by that phrase when I saw you produce it.
I think the invisibility gap is that we don't know what we have, right?
Yeah,
So that when we look at, about 70% of the population, it was great to see 20% that had that handle.
yeah,
But, what is it? And, who are the vendors? In some cases, I'm sure that some of the people on the call can really relate is, what's the relationship with the vendor, what's really going on in the services that you have, how much is the cost. You get an invoice from often sometimes with the vendors, and there's additional cost. Was that something that you expected? So the visibility of the true cost aren't there. What is, when you're onboarding an employee in a new location or you're terminating them, often there is additional cost because there's additional reporting and things that happen. And when I look at the pieces of compensation, the tracking the time, the leave pieces, those are kind of probably things that people aren't thinking about, what the cost of that's in that in the technology, or are we doing it manually? That manual process to be able to track that information. And having worked in tech companies where I spent a great deal of my time working with stock equity for many, many years, that is a whole project in itself if that is something that your organization is offering globally, right? So it's not, what you offer and what the requirements are in Ireland are different than the requirements in the US. What does that look like? And the timing and the reporting of that. But that is a compensation component that makes it the visibility of running those programs. Sometimes that's not real clear on that benefit piece. And so that's why when we say two or three times the vendor fees, the vendor, depending on what the vendor's doing for us. So often the vendor, we think that the vendor's doing all of the pieces, the compliance and those pieces, but that's not what the vendor's doing. They're only doing the calculation. So when we do that due diligence to look at vendor services and what
yeah,
we need to kind of define what that looks like. And that goes through that kind of procurement process and what we have. And if you're inheriting or walk into a job, that's one of the challenges you have is, what do I have in my organization? So you have to look at the vendors first to kind of pull out those pieces. and understanding what they're doing. And then I often call us, kind of private detectives in payroll, because we're looking at across the organization who has different information that impacts payroll, because at the end of the day, it impacts the employee's compensation and the requirement to be compliant, but it also impacts the financial cost to the organization. And that's really what we're looking at, is what is that
Yeah.
financial cost? Because organizations are recognizing there is cost to that. To do it correctly, there is a cost. And what our role as leaders in global payroll is to manage that cost so that we're meeting the needs of our organization.
Yeah.
So the executives are asking, what is that cost, right? They see a number. I often say they're extremely busy and smart individuals in your organization, but they have no idea of the complexity of, doing processing in India versus Ireland versus
Yes.
China, or even in Brazil. Even if you look at those four countries, what the impact of trying to get that information via language, culture, vendors, and all those pieces to get that true cost to share with your
Yeah.
organization. They just expect a number, and in some cases, we kind of in the US often say people just think we press a button and things come out. And so that's not true. We know what
No.
the challenges of doing that.
Yeah, and I think one of the points as we were preparing for this that we made was that it's not just about arriving at a figure, it's a credible figure, and to be able to
Mhm.
explain the components. I sort of said in my intro, it's not enough simply to go we pay for services, and this is the cost of my team. This is the salaries cumulatively of our team across the board. It's not sort of credible to go, and those are our costs. Because actually, any executive worth their salt will know that across any department, there is far more complexity in arriving at the total cost of delivering a service. It's never as simple as headcount plus services. So
I, I
with that,
I agree.
yeah. Well, but I think something that is interesting to look at, and you had outlined, I suppose, three myths. I was intrigued by your use of the word myth, Mary, and I wonder who it is that's perpetuating these myths. But you'd outlined these three myths, I suppose, that people perhaps fall foul of when calculating their costs.
Well, I think that the first myth, that it's really easy just to look at the vendor cost and think that you have the total cost, right? If you're not looking
Yeah,
at what we consider the big picture of what's involved with it. And it also depends on the vendor and the services
yeah,
you're using, as I already touched base on that. And an accounting firm versus one of our providers, there's different pieces to that and services that they're going to do and stand up for. So once again, that goes into that deeper dive into what the vendors are. It doesn't equal, because there's probably other things that are out there. What about
yeah,
penalty notices? Just throw that out there, that you might get. Are you tracking those penalty notices and the cost of those penalty notices, and why, right? So that's additional costs that, if you're just using, here's my vendor cost, what does that look like? Consulting services that you might need for any type of pieces that you have. The consulting services that I see, especially when you have, large expats or global mobility programs, there's
mm,
consulting services, and that's part of your payroll cost. Yes, it's a function of the organization deciding to move that person there, but there's costs to do it correctly and do the reporting correctly.
yeah,
And so that's one of the myths. And the other myth is, a lot of times people say, well, if I can consolidate it, it's going to make it easier, right? So really, in reality, we have to look at what we have, right? So it doesn't always work to consolidate that. So who's going to do the services? And we'll talk in a few minutes about, the people involved and the vendors that are involved. But really looking at what that looks like. Consolidation can help you and support you, but are you still, at the end of the day, I always have to think about, am I going to get the compliance piece that I need? So I need to deliver that compliant payroll for
mm,
two reasons: to compliance for the organization, but compliance for the employee. the last thing that you want to do is not deliver a compliant payroll to an employee, because immediately, I think anybody will agree, if there's an issues, that gets escalated across the organization and a big lack of trust. So really, if we're going to try to consolidate, we have to start to look at where's standardization, where's the processes, how we're structured, right? I often, I have a preference, and I often share is I have a preference to doing it regional, and breaking it out to what's important with standardization and a global owner, so that you can really look at what those costs are. And somebody's managing the costs, as I said, managing what you're looking at. And a lot of times people have the myth that it's a fixed cost, the fixed cost of X. It costs X euros per employee to process the payroll. But there's more than that just processes the payroll. The technology piece, if we're bringing all of those pieces into it, it's more than just that fixed cost that you're paying the vendor. Yes, that's a point that we're looking at as part of managing the cost, how much that is and what the services we're getting, but that is not the end cost that we need to look
Yeah.
at when we're trying to benchmark.
Yeah. Well, so with that, you've outlined, I suppose, five key factors or the beginnings of a front, and I hope people are taking note as ever. We'll share all of this material with people afterwards. These are five elements, Mary, that you've identified as, I suppose, the seeds of a framework to begin to calculate all of those total costs. You might take us through them, and then we have a slide that goes through them in a little more detail.
Yeah, so the first one really is looking at the teams that you have, and as the next slide we'll go into a deeper dive into that. But are we large enough to have a shared services? Who's doing the processing? What that role is important with the payroll teams. And where are you on that payroll journey? Is there a good relationship with those teams, right? So I
Mm.
strongly believe in relationships and building those teams so that you're sharing and working together. Standardization is one of those ones as we work together and discover what we have. Looking at those vendor fees and charges, what does that look like in your organization? You may have inherited these vendors through acquisitions, and you may not have been the person that was going through the negotiation with the procurement teams. What does that look like today? Has the fees increased? And why have they increased, right? Is there a fee increase? Is it reasonable? What do you actually need? So that's a big piece to look at, that we have to look at. And then technology is here. So technology is, do we have integrations? Often we don't. I often talk to people, and they have Workday, but they're not doing any integrations. They're doing, manual reporting or a manual file that comes into payroll. And what does that look like? Why aren't we using integration? It does take, when you're moving at technology, it does take time to get it started, right? And the team on board. And I would say, what's the roadmap to map that through, and what does that look like? So doing the integrations and making sure that those are strong, and those come from many sources, not just the HCM sources. Some have one-time payments coming from different systems, like for commissions or benefits. The stock piece, the time and attendance, as I mentioned in itself. If you think about all the different leaves and time off we have to have, and what reporting has to be done. If I'm in a situation where I pay overtime, what does that look like for that integration? So looking at that. And in your organization, when we look at this, is sometimes we have to just be upfront honest. Do we do a lot of manual work, and why? Really, just why? Whatever the reason is, let's just document why. Okay. It's not the end of the world. You are not the first organization that's going to have that. What manual fixes are going on? What's happening? And just getting those key things together so that you and your teams can think about, how are we going to move forward with that? And do we have a lot of escalations with our vendors? So once again, that relationship between your organization with the vendors and how it's structured all play a piece of how we're going to get that payroll cost and manage it to the best ability so that we're making sure our organization is not paying anymore. And I can't, we'll go into the next one, but payroll's all centered around compliance as always, right? So our world around us is always changing with new tax laws and pieces, but making sure that we're following that compliance piece because that is critical for our organization to exist. And in a half a second, if we're not doing something correct, it gets out in social media. The
Yes,
advantages of social
unfortunately.
media today. So
Absolutely.
kind of,
Yeah. When the payroll team also becomes the guardian of company reputation as well. Um,
right.
are you've sort of taken us through it in more detail here. I think one important thing that has to be outlined is the value, I think, Mary, in the framework that you've provided here is that if you can work out your total cost distributed across each of these five categories, that's when you begin to identify the areas for optimization. That you begin to look at and go, well, expressed as a fraction of our total cost, are we really comfortable with how much we're paying either for technology or for our vendors? Or I suppose you can start to understand the balance between your five cost centers. And that's where the eyes start to open and go, okay, there's rooms for efficiency here.
I agree. And this slide, I really like this slide. So I think when the deck gets sent to you, it kind of will help everybody that's on the call to think about, the people aspect, who's doing what in your organization. And just depending on where you are, is that defined or roadmapped or a governance structure, right? So once again, that's the goal we're trying to achieve is understanding what's happening and optimizing it to the maximum. But we all know, depending on what's happening in the organization, we may have to take different steps. And as we enter 2026 right now, what are those things that we need to work on in the organization? People is huge. You're going to need the people and the staff, and I threw some countries out there. If I look at Brazil, I need, what's my language support? If I'm English speaking, I speak no Portuguese. Good luck for me, right? I have to be able to have some support and help with that, right? So to be able to be compliant. So that's really looking at who's doing what and what that looks like. What is their roles? Defining if the role is appropriate. I'm going to say as you start to look through some of these things, it may be some of the things the person is doing is better suited to another group in the organization, sometimes HR or different functions. What does that look like, and how many people are there? The risk and compliance piece, as we need to know what that is, and we need to be tracking that. So we have to be able to make sure we're delivering compliant payroll, and if we're not, what is the deep down reason? So if a penalty notices comes, what's that mediation to go in and do that deep dive and to find the root cause analysis? What is actually happening with that? Do I often it's sometimes programs are introduced that the teams may not understand all of the compensation pieces to that, and they may then depend on the vendor, but the vendor may not be up to date on what's happened with that. And so I've already kind of shared with you the complexity of equity and some of the benefits that are out there, but just because the vendor's able to process things, they may not be the expert in that particular country and location. So we need to look at what that is and where are some of the areas that we have issues with, and raise that up. That's one of the any risk or compliance are things that we need to talk about and raise up to our senior leaders so they understand.
There was a little
Now,
nugget. There was a little nugget in there
uh,
where you mentioned if you're doing the contract review of your vendors, you're doing the cost analysis piece, understanding, where late fees and extra costs come in. You also mentioned the language proportion in Brazil, and we've seen sophisticated companies when they're, trying to bring their payroll function up to the next level, they will push for English as the base language across the board and write that into contracts. And then the difficult part, of course, is enforcing that too. But I just thought that was an extra little nugget I've heard you talk about there before. So a great point there too, Mary.
Well, it's having spent some time setting up an entity in Brazil and working through that team, it's really very difficult if you don't have Portuguese. You could be English speaking, but you have to then spend a lot of time with translation of documents when we talk about compliance and reporting, and they the group or the assignment that they give you for your organization, what's required for pay and those pieces, Christmas bonuses, when the annual raises, all of those documents come across in Portuguese, not English. And yes, we can translate through our many pieces, but at the end of the day, you need to have some support in that. And that's one country that is a standout. But I'm going to say in APAC and in some areas, it depends on the business, to be honest with you. If my employees are not English speaking, I'm really going to have to design something that's going to work. And if we look at Japan and they're not English speaking, you're running operations, you're going to need support there. I
Yeah.
mean, it's globally, I know we like to have people with both English and different languages, and that helps support our organization. And that's why we have to hire, when we talk about the people piece, that's why we have to hire people in organizations to support those functions. And it drills down to the type of organization we're working in and the type of workers we have. There's
Yeah.
many organizations where, if I'm not really picking on Japan, but if they're doing services, they all speak Japanese, and I'm speaking English. We're definitely going to get lost in translation.
Um, Rude, thank you for very much for your contributions to the chat. Mary, one person on there has just asked the question, when is it important to know what your costs are? And he's posited that it's when you're changing processes or you're moving from in-house perhaps to outsourcing or you're way up that decision. Would you agree, or do you think there's a necessity to be more on top of your costs all year round, irrespective of whether a change is on the horizon?
Well, if you're making changes, definitely you're going to need to know what the cost is today, and not only the cost, but the services you're making that change with, right? Are you getting the same services, and why you're making that change? I
Yeah.
that's one piece to look at it, but you definitely should be looking at cost throughout the entire year because it's a cost to the organization. And as changes happen in the footprint of countries that you have,
Mm.
there may be an increased cost due to something that is being introduced in that particular location, a new reporting requirement that's required in a certain country,
Yeah.
or taxes, employer taxes that are now being introduced, and those two are an additional cost, or a change in, even when we talk about employer cost, what's the percent of employer cost with changes? Remember, uh, globally, we're not all on the calendar year. We're all across the world on when we do that. The UK will be ending their year soon, along with India and a few of the other countries, Hong Kong, and then of course then we have, in the middle of the year we have Australia, just to name a few. But just what does that look like for the cost, and what is
Yeah.
that impact to the employer, right? So 1 or 2% in an organization is for employer cost. Additional is going to impact their plans and the budgets for those
Absolutely.
costs. So I think it's a year-round piece. It's also, where are you today to get that together? And sometimes we have to take baby steps with the groups to get where we want, and
Mhm.
continuing to work with those people, with the people aspect, to see how we're going to achieve that.
If I may, Ray, just one other thing that I think Rude has asked here was that I suppose calculating the quality of service, and it is related to costs. You'll see I've ran a poll there where errors and rework, 30% of people had that as the hardest thing to calculate in terms of the cost. And there's a little bit of overlap, I suppose, there in terms of that question of how to calculate the quality of service. Very interested to hear your opinion on it, Mary. I'll say internally here at Payslip, one of the things that we do with our customers, in terms of their SLAs, is to track the number of reversions, let's say, of a GTN, for example. Um, when you cross all of your providers, let's say you've got 12 and month by month, pay run by pay run, you're tracking the number of, okay, Spain, we constantly have a scenario where there's two, three revisions or reversions, whereas our UK provider, they seem to get through a lot more cleanly. That's certainly one way, Mary, of estimating the quality of the service that you're paying for.
Yes, that's definitely one way. The other thing that a lot of times when they look at the quality is when they send a response, a inquiry to the vendor, and how fast is that inquiry responded to? Because if it's an inquiry, let's say it's an inquiry regarding an employee, the
Mhm.
employee has an expectation of when they should get the response back. So how fast is that response? And is it just, okay, we'll log the ticket and we'll get back to you? Are you chasing those items? What does that look like? If you're completing things on time, are they delivering based on time, right? So
Yeah.
let's not even talk about the rework piece. We Are they delivering it on time to you based on what your agreement? What is that relationship in the organization with the vendors? And really that does involve, because you've got many different vendors out there that are supporting you, anywhere from accounting firms that can be helping you, the aggregators, you might be doing employee of record. What are those relationships with those providers? And have we, from the people aspect, brought them in to be part of our team, right? So we are not successful unless we have vendors that are supporting and doing that, and that we understand what the costs are. So if there's additional cost, or it may come back, let's just be honest, it may come back from the vendor that the team that we thought was providing everything on time isn't doing that, right? So I'm going to be really, really honest. In one particular piece in
Yeah.
my career, the teams didn't that wanted to replace the vendor. I went with the HR representative when I was actually in that country, and the first person that talked to me was the manager to explain to me that the team was not turning in anything on time, and that his employee that was helping us, or was responsible for the work, was staying late and things were meeting the schedule, but nothing was turned in on time. So different story. So that's
Yeah.
why we have to look at all angles of what's happening. And I think it's that trust and honor, being honest about things that aren't working. So those are
Yes.
things on the vendor side. And yes, if as you're making changes, please understand what you've got and what the cost is and where you're moving and why you're doing that. Because I always tell people, as we talk about green today, the grass is not always greener on the other side. You're just inheriting
Absolutely.
some new issues that you have to look at.
Absolutely. I would say to people as well, if you go back, if you visit the Payslip website and have a look through some of our previous webinars, Mary and I did a session last year on managing a change in vendor, and we covered a lot of this stuff actually in more detail. So do have a little look if something to gear when you're gearing up for a change, actually how to go about it. So we did cover that in some detail last year. So if people are interested, check it out. I'm conscious that we're up against the clock and we've got a lot to cover, so we might crack on. I know there's a
Yeah,
request
let's
in
crack
there
on.
from an individual around the challenges of expatriation. That's something we might take offline. We might follow up with that individual with some tips and tricks. I'm just conscious that we're a
Okay.
little bit up against it. Um, Mary, I suppose as part of all this, yeah, where's some of the inefficiencies hide? You've outlined five areas that you've seen where people tend to get a little bit bogged down, or the traps they fall into.
And I think we've kind of talked through, so we can go fairly
Yeah.
quickly. Having many vendors, manual work. Why are we having manual work? We just need to analyze what's happened, right? It may be not using technology, no support there. The country may have been 5 people, and now you're 2,000, right? So what's happened with that? And the partnership or the vendor piece of late HR changes, right? Do we have integration that brings the things in? But what's that relationship to that people and the team and our
Yeah.
organization? What's happening, and going through that true piece so that we have good data quality. And then in some organizations, we talked about the technology and limited, it may be limited. What can we do? What's available to do that on our roadmap? What HR systems do we have? What does that look like doing those deeper dives? In some cases, that's a big deeper dive that may be an investigation that we're going to do this year and then make a decision how we move forward based on what we find. And that's not uncommon to
Yeah,
have that happen and deciding what to do. And then the reporting piece is key, right? So reporting and ownership. Do we have global reporting? And to me, having global reporting that can be available on your at your fingertips, right? So if I need to look at what it looks like for the month of January, and I want it in euros, and then I want it in USD, and I may want it in the local language, the local country, all across the board. What does that look like? So that's key to develop, and that's what senior leaders need to know, that we're able to see that visibility. As we talked about visibility, seeing that's part of the true cost. What's involved with getting that reporting and the costs
absolutely.
from the employee piece of it. Yes, we know what their compensation is, but we can't forget about the our friendly friends in each tax agency that has employer costs and different costs that are out there.
Absolutely not. No, no, we're all for building those bridges and maintaining them really across HR and tax and everything else in between. We won't go through these necessarily in too much detail because, again, look, everyone that's on the webinar will send out all of these slides to you. And as you'll see here as I go through it, Mary has kind of listed out some practical steps that you can take across each of the aspects. So, here, I suppose, dealing with the visibility side, Mary. But you also had a couple of ideas as to how people can actually reduce some of their costs as well and more towards that optimization angle.
Correct. So I think it's really looking at what you have today. Where do we want to go? How we can optimize that, tracking duplicate work, who's doing what, what's the, sometimes we have people checking. How many checkers do we have? What's involved in that piece? Starting to do the metrics of what's actually happening. How many people do we have on the team? Do we have that information? And then making sure that if there's rework and those pieces and penalties, making sure we're doing the root cause analysis and
Yeah,
deciding what's happening. So you looking at that, what's actually happening. So to me, it goes back to that investigating what you have,
exactly.
documenting what you have, and then moving forward as a governance group.
Yeah. Um, so I suppose then, again, I love this. We won't spend too much time, but this blueprint for vendor control, and I think, it's come up here in some of the questions as well, and some of the feedback around, I suppose, getting value for money out of your SLAs. Okay, so there's one form of cost reduction is cost optimization, and getting what you're paying for is certainly one aspect of it. So again, there's some material here for people to dig into after the fact, and again, some metrics here, Mary, that you've put together as to where you would begin, or certainly when you were in the hot seat working in-house for a multinational, some of the metrics and the benchmarking that you were trying to put together. But with all of that said, I think it's time to turn our attention to Nigel. And Nigel, you've prepared some data here, I suppose, on running these calculations themselves. You're going to introduce the payroll calculation tool that we've developed and some benchmarking data, which I think people on the call will find very interesting indeed.
Absolutely. And Mary, I love this second bullet point you have here. It's starting to give some data. It's particularly Rude is in the chat there asking questions about insourcing, outsourcing, potentially shared service centers. You see here the centralized models you called out between 1 and 1.2 um, people on your payroll team in order to manage 1,000 employees in a centralized model, but obviously gets larger as you have local payroll teams in each individual country.
Yeah, that's a key kind of call out. But the other piece of that call out, it goes to what's going on, as we already talked about, the organization for the employees, like the language piece. Language will impact that totally, and
Yeah.
the service. So some organizations really have strong service models to support employees, right? So the employee is king, right? I'm gonna share back, I'm come from a technology area and we took care of our engineers to no end. So that is something that is additional headcount that you might have to have, and what that
Uh,
piece is.
and you're referring to we have more benefits and share programs, so therefore the
Yeah,
complexity of our payroll requires more
right.
people.
And then what the role is in payroll, right? So
Yeah.
some organizations just do the payroll piece, right? They're responsible for payroll, but in some organizations, you're responsible for the reconciliations for the finance team. You're responsible for delivering the general ledger, looking at that, answering questions from financial analysts of why something's at this piece. So that, of course, requires people with different skill sets than just
Mm-hmm.
somebody that's calculating payroll. So that then increases the model and what that looks like. So how you do it, there's no right or wrong. What you're doing is trying to support the organization. And Nigel, your tool that you're going to share with us has us the beginning steps to see what the costs are, and then each organization can define what they actually need and why we have those costs.
Exactly. So that's the practical piece we wanted to move to, and show folks just for the last 8 or so minutes here some of the practical steps. So the background here is Payslip. We built an ROI analysis and business case tool with the help of a third-party partner. It's taken 18 or months or 2 years to really get the data behind it and enhance the model. We obviously built it for selfish reasons. That was to help prospects evaluating Payslip justify, here's our current payroll costs and here's the potential savings with a modern global payroll technology like Payslip. But for the audience here today, not everyone might be evaluating Payslip. There is still some value in how we can help you measure your current payroll costs. The tool we built looks a little bit like this. It's quite detailed. It looks a little bit like an Excel spreadsheet. So the finance folks on the call are leaning in. But in essence, we're capturing number of hours on particular tasks around payroll. It's summarized by large country, medium country, small countries. So we define what those are with you, and we're able to then measure roughly, broadly. If you have 7 very large countries, one of them has a PG integration, the others are all manual. One has a time and attendance integration from SAP to whatever it might be. You want the aggregate of those. You don't want to go into, as everyone mentioned in the poll there earlier, it's very hard to get the minutia of the cost in every single country. So this is where we start. It takes roughly 45 minutes to an hour to go through together. And then there's probably another hour of tweaking the actual data here as you need it. But it's more than just an Excel spreadsheet. It spits out a finance approval business case ready PowerPoint here. So you've got graphs, you've got justifications, you have executive summaries, you have value drivers here within the tool. So this is one of the major outputs that we get from this particular analysis. What I wanted to do just for 2-3 minutes is show you a comparison of 2 different scenarios. So some of you on the call might relate to this particular scenario here, a mid-market company, but they've a very large footprint globally. Mary, this might have been earlier in your career, before the companies you work with grew and grew and grew and grew. It might be sort of mid-growth there. So this particular semi-fictional, but a hybrid of several companies that we worked with, has 4,500 employees. They have 12 payroll specialists on their payroll team, and they're split across 30 different countries. So large, medium, and small. I've worked out the ratio here to show that they're not necessarily the most automated or efficient in this particular example compared to the benchmarks Mary has shown us earlier, and you'll see in the slide deck after. The second company is on that growth phase. It's a larger, on the way to full-scale enterprise. I didn't want to show the plus 100,000 employee type companies here in this example, but this particular one is modeled off of 6 or 7 different companies that we've worked with. They're in 46 different countries, 35 payroll specialists. So you're starting to see what the ratios might be depending on your level of automation. And this particular ratio here for this company is a little bit more efficient, some shared service centers in some regions. Let's plug scenario A into the Payslip tool and show you what the output looks like. What we're trying to help measure are 3 different pillars. One are capture the labor costs. Some of you in the poll, around 20%, thought that this was the most difficult part to capture. Others felt the hard costs, things like your vendor fees, your late fees, your fines, your salary overpayments, paying people who might not work at your company anymore. Those land here in the hard costs and the issues. And then you have risk exposure costs as well. Also difficult to measure. We give it a stab here with the Payslip tool. Oopsie daisy, I've gone into something completely different. Oh,
Gremlins within the system, Nigel.
of course. And it's a PowerPoint, huh? Let me try. I'll move through this again.
Folks, this is how you know this is live and not recorded. You know, that's Nigel's just thrown that in to show that we really are hosting this live.
Exactly.
But this is great. I mean, this is great to get started, right, Nigel? Like going out and the tools available. You don't have to be, like you already shared. This is a Payslip client. This is a way to get to see where you are today and get some information.
Exactly.
And then you might have to dig into it a little bit more because you don't have the total cost in certain things, but at least you have the initial footprint to start, which is key.
Exactly. That's the starting point. And that's what we wanted to share with folks on the call today. So we plug into this tool the number of countries, specialists, and so on. This part is important. This varies completely when we sit down with people. Just to find the cost. This is one of the base pieces of the formula is the salaries of your payroll teams, essentially. These vary country by country, of course. You want the average. We have seen the number between 40,000 and 42,000 when you're measuring both Western Europe, Eastern Europe, and sort of combine and amalgamate those. But you also need to consider the employer costs as well. So the true cost of an employee on your payroll team might be a bit higher than you might expect. With that, we work out a daily cost, and with that, an hourly cost. Why 5.5? 7.5-hour working day, maybe minus lunch, meetings, other bits and pieces. We see people put in between 5.5 and 6.5 kind of active hours a day. That's your hourly cost for a task then. We won't go through this in detail. So here are the hard costs. We're helping you work out things like late fees, not paying the correct amount, salary overpayments. That's one section of the tool. Another is working out your labor costs, section by section. So preparing your payroll data for the vendor. Then when you've sent it, communicating and managing them, perhaps 2 hours per payroll spent every month managing that. That works out at 31,000 euro cost per year. If you do spend 2 hours, let's say, hey, that fee is wrong. Hey, can you update this tax for this person? I'm changing a salary amount for this particular individual. If you're back and forth for 2 hours total in the month, that would be what your cost might look like.
And that's also a great yardstick, Nigel, to be able to go back to your service providers and to be able to say, actually, there's a hard cost to your inefficiencies, or there's a hard cost to the extra work that we're having to do every month. That's a powerful tool.
100%, just putting some of this down on paper. So in my particular example, the company I've modeled out here, they spend 13,000 hours annually working on payroll. That's their labor cost here. But when you factor in hard costs and the risk costs, such as fines, etc., late fees, that works out at €1 million a year spent running the payroll service. When you introduce Payslip, a little bit of a plug here. These are the potential savings with Payslip. We would help this company save €83,000 per year on hard costs, 350K in productivity gains. That time, that manual spreadsheet work can be moved to other high value areas, and risk mitigation costs decrease as well. The larger company, let's say you have 20,000 plus employees across a higher headcount. Those costs obviously work out a bit higher. It might not be proportional. You have additional countries, additional risks, languages, regions, and so on, and you completely different levels of automation. So the private detectives, the payroll teams that Mary described you guys earlier as, you might work out that your costs at this particular size looks like a completely different figure and might not be proportional to what you saw previously. Now for the fun part, where you guys can come in. If you want to try this yourself, you can even use one of my examples here in the tool. If you don't want to use your maybe your own figures that you might have in your head, you can try and use this tool on the Payslip website. It is a light version of what I've shown you. It takes in 3 different pieces. We've run a data regression on all of the data that we have, anonymized it, and shown you here that you can get your existing costs, as well as, of course, the potential savings with Payslip. But I think everyone here, even if you're not evaluating Payslip, can go today to this tool. It's on our website. Jer is about to share a link in the chat.
Absolutely.
And if you ignore this advertisement for the webinar you're currently on, and if I plugged in those figures I had here, I can move these sliders. Number of countries was about 46, and number of employees was 22,000. So I can play with these and start to estimate what my global payroll costs might be for all of these factors, not just labor costs. This payroll team size one is actually very important. We're not going to make up a figure or something that's completely imaginary. We're going to limit it based on the number of employees that you have on your payroll team. All you guys need to do, click download, you'll get a detailed report. I love this. Jer did some fantastic work helping build this deck as well. This is the output that I was talking about. Here's your estimate for the numbers I have plugged in for my current state costs across those three pillars. Savings with Payslip, of course. And then slide 6. Have a look at this one as well in your own time. You can benchmark your current setup against what we've seen as the averages in our data. And we don't see much of a correlation between the number of employees. If you have 50,000 people in the United States, you could run that whole payroll with 3 people. But if you've 50,000 people across 50 countries, you're going to be much higher here in the upper end of the specialists required to run that particular payroll. Hopefully everyone can give that a shot today. We'll give you a couple of minutes back. But we love this tool. It's available on our website. Please give it a try. And there's definitely value for you all here in the report that it spits out.
Absolutely. I've included the link there to the tool that's live on our website now in the chat. And look, if for whatever reason that you can't do it now, it's not convenient, we'll follow up in the material after this when we're sending across the deck, which is packed with those helpful tips and tricks and things to look out for that Mary's put together. Nigel, you're still sharing there.
Sorry, sir.
That's all right. Giving away the trade secrets about what
Yeah.
about all of the tasks that you have left to get done today and during the week. Nigel's spreadsheets, I'm sure, is a scary thing, known only
Whoopsie
to
daisy.
the best amongst us. But look, for those who are on the call, thank you for joining us. Like I say, we'll follow up with the deck and include the link again to that tool. Check it out. That's what it's all about. Like I say, there's no hidden fee or no hidden cost in the interest of transparency. It's a tool we've created. We created it initially for our own benefit and to help our prospects, but it's available there for everyone. Okay, you can sign up, use it. It doesn't mean that you have to become a Payslip customer at all. It's for the greater good and for the betterment and improvement of the payroll industry because that's what we're all about. Mary, thank you very much for joining us as ever.
Thank you.
No doubt we'll have you in a couple of months to tackle some other topic related to the payroll industry and operations. Nigel, thank you, of course, for joining us from what Sylvia has told us earlier on is the real capital of Ireland down in Cork.
She
But
is massively correct. Yes.
we won't go into any more detail than that. Listen, thank you very much. Thank you, Sylvia. You're happy with that one. I gave you the plug. I'm a
Yes.
Tipperary man,
Yeah.
Sylvia, so that really did take something out of me to say that. Look, thank you so much to everyone who joined. We had people on from Costa Rica, we had people from India, we had people from Canada, Germany, and everywhere in between. It's just so lovely to see that mix. I also we really appreciate people taking time out of their day to join us. I know there's value in it for you, but that doesn't, betray the fact that it takes a lot of effort. We all have lots of stuff to do. We deeply appreciate you taking time out of your day to join us on this because that's why we do it. So stay tuned, keep in touch, via the website, sign up for the mailing list. We run one of these pretty much every single month, always focused on giving value back, operationally, executionally, however we can. So yeah, keep in touch and hopefully I shall see you all on the next one. Thank you very much, folks. Bye bye. Enjoy
Thank you,
the rest
sir.
of your day.
Thank you.
Bye bye.